the sound of the door slamming still echoes in my mind, sharp, final, like a gunshot through the quiet. The air smelled of cold rain and lavender detergent, the kind I'd used to wash Ethan's blanket that morning. 1 second she was there, and the next, gone. My daughter. My own flesh and blood, walking away while her sick child slept in the next room. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because sometimes, betrayal doesn't come from strangers, but from the ones you love most. I stood frozen, one hand on the doorframe, my heart beat louder than the storm outside, wondering how a heart could break and still keep beating. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I can still hear the door slam. It was sharp, final, the kind of sound that seems to echo long after it's gone. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the space where my daughter had been. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world outside kept moving. The faint hum of cars, the wind against the screen door, while mine had stopped completely. Lauren had left, just like that. Her son, my grandson, was upstairs in bed, sick and weak, his breathing uneven through the baby monitor. She didn't even glance back. One hand on her suitcase, the other clutching her phone. She walked out as if she were shedding an inconvenience, not a child. I didn't chase her. I couldn't. My legs felt like they'd turned to stone. In that stillness, guilt crawled into every corner of me. I kept wondering where I went wrong, how I had raised someone who could be so empty inside. I remembered the little girl she once was, curious, soft-spoken, the one who used to slip her hand into mine during thunderstorms. Somewhere between then and now, something broke in her that I never saw in time to fix. I sat on the edge of the couch, trying to gather myself, the air thick with the smell of her perfume still hanging in the doorway. I looked toward the stairs and thought of Ethan, how I would have to tell him, somehow, that his mother wasn't coming back. Not tonight, maybe not ever. My heart ached with the kind of pain that doesn't scream. It hums, low and constant, like a wound that refuses to close. That night, I made a silent promise. Whatever she had thrown away, I would protect. Whatever she had left behind, I would love. Ethan didn't deserve to pay for her selfishness. None of us did. It's been many years since that day. The smell of her perfume is long gone, but the memory of that door closing never faded. Sometimes, when I think of her now, I realize the cruelest part wasn't that she left. It's that she would come back one day. Not for love, not for forgiveness, but for something far colder. And that's where the real story begins. Before everything changed, our house in suburban Ohio was filled with the kind of quiet joy most people take for granted. Sunday mornings smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. The front porch was always swept clean, and in summer, the air hummed with cicadas while Ethan played in the yard with his toy trucks. He was the kind of child who made you believe goodness could be born pure, gentle, curious, always asking why the sky turned pink at sunset. Lauren used to laugh at his questions. Back then, she still laughed easily. Life felt simple, like we were living inside a picture frame. Nothing perfect, but steady. I'd help with the cooking, Tom would fix the lawnmower, and Lauren would come home from her job at the salon, tired but proud. For a while, I thought she was growing into a woman who understood love and responsibility. I didn't know how fragile that illusion really was. When Ethan started getting sick, it was so gradual at first that I almost didn't notice. He was pale one morning, a little slower getting up. Then came the fevers, the coughs, the long drives to the children's hospital in Cleveland. The doctor spoke in a language that made everything sound uncertain. Tests, treatments, probabilities. They said he'd need medication, regular monitoring, and patience. I had plenty of patience. Lauren did not. At first, she pretended to handle it. But every appointment, every sleepless night, chipped something away inside her. She began spending more time on her phone than by her son's bedside. When I tried to tell her that Ethan just needed her presence, she'd roll her eyes and say she couldn't breathe in this miserable routine. I wanted to shake her, to remind her that love isn't supposed to be convenient. It broke me to watch her turn cold. I'd see Ethan reaching for her hand, and she'd pretend not to notice. She started going out more, dinners with friends, trips that lasted longer than she'd admit. Every time she left, she'd say it was to clear her head, but every time she returned, she seemed farther away. The night she truly left, there was no warning. It was early spring. The tulips in the front yard had just started to bloom. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch after a long day at the hospital. When I went upstairs later, I found a note on the kitchen table. Just one line, cold and final, saying she needed to live her own life. That was all. For a long time, I just stood there staring at it, as if the words might change if I read them enough times. But they didn't. The sound of the refrigerator running felt deafening in the silence. Tom found me sitting there at 2:30 a.m., holding that note like it might disintegrate if I let go. I went into Ethan's room and watched him sleep. His little hands were curled near his face, the faintest smile on his lips, peaceful and unaware. In that moment, something in me settled. I wasn't going to let his mother's absence define him. I promised, right then, that he would never know what abandonment felt like again. Not while I was breathing. That was the night everything broke. But it was also the night something else began. The slow, steady kind of love that holds even when everything else falls apart. I didn't know it yet, but that promise would become my life's purpose. The day Tom passed, the world felt muted, like someone had turned down the volume on life itself. It was early morning, still dim outside, and I remember the faint ticking of the clock by the kitchen window. He'd complained the night before about feeling tired. Nothing more. Then, just like that, he was gone. His heart stopping quietly in his sleep. No goodbye. No warning. Just an unbearable stillness that settled over everything. For days, I kept expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway, his cough before breakfast, the sound of the front door opening at 2:30 p.m. when he came back from errands. But there was only silence, thick and unforgiving. Grief has its own rhythm. It doesn't rush. It lingers in corners you forget to clean. I moved through the days like a shadow, sorting papers, answering calls, thanking people for their condolences while barely recognizing my own voice. The funeral was a blur of black coats and murmured sympathies. Everyone meant well, but no one could touch the hollow ache inside me. When the house finally emptied, the quiet returned, louder than ever. Lauren called once. Her voice was clipped, impatient, almost as if she were checking off a box on some invisible list. She said she was sorry, but couldn't make it to the funeral. Something about work. Something about timing. I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just an old, familiar disappointment that sat heavy on my chest. Whatever softness she once had was long gone. Ethan, though, he carried a gentleness that surprised me. He didn't talk much about his grandfather's passing, but I could see it in the way he moved around the house. Careful and quiet, as if he understood I might break if he made a sound too loud. One evening, I found him sitting in Tom's old chair, legs tucked up, reading. The light from the lamp caught his face, and for a moment, he looked older, steady, sure, like a young man learning how to bear weight too soon. That night, as I stood at the sink, I felt his small hand slip into mine. No words, just presence. It was the kind of comfort no adult could offer. Pure, instinctive, born of shared loss. And in that touch, I realized something. Though I had lost my husband, I hadn't lost everything. Love doesn't disappear. It shifts, reshapes itself, finds new ways to live. Ethan had become the quiet strength I didn't know I still needed. The protector had changed form. And somehow, through pain, life had begun teaching me again that even in the darkest grief, something in us still bends toward the light. Time has a way of softening memories, like waves smoothing sharp stones. Before I realized it, Ethan wasn't the small, fragile boy who used to cling to my hand at the doctor's office. He had grown tall, steady, and sure, a young man with a calm strength that reminded me so much of his grandfather. The house felt different now, lighter. The kind of quiet that comes not from loss, but from peace. By 16, Ethan had a focus that most adults never find. He'd always been gentle, but now that gentleness carried purpose. He spent his evenings buried in books, studying cases, fascinated by how people fought for justice. He told me once that no one should ever feel helpless the way he once did. I could see the fire in him, the kind that's born from pain, but fueled by compassion. His grades were near perfect, but what made me proud wasn't the numbers. It was his heart. The way he tutored younger kids after school, the way he defended classmates who couldn't speak up for themselves. He was becoming the kind of man who turned empathy into strength. Sometimes I'd watch him from the kitchen window as he mowed the lawn, sleeves rolled up, face sunlit with determination. In those moments, I'd whisper a thank you to Tom. I saw his spirit in Ethan, the same quiet dignity, the same unwavering sense of right and wrong. It was as if life had given me back a piece of what it once took. Then, one spring afternoon, Ethan told me he'd made a decision. He was going to change his last name to Henderson, my maiden name. I remember sitting at the dining table, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains as his words sank in. He said it wasn't out of anger, but out of gratitude, that this home, this love, was the family that shaped him. That single act felt like both a closure and a beginning. He was honoring the life we built from the ashes, and quietly letting go of the woman who had left him behind. It was the moment I realized he had fully stepped into himself, not just surviving his past, but transforming it into purpose. I couldn't have known then how that strength, that new name, would soon be tested. But in that moment, All I felt was pride and a deep, quiet peace that maybe, just maybe, we had done something right. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those soft spring days when the house felt at peace. The sunlight drifted lazily through the curtains. The kettle hummed on the stove, and I was folding laundry in the living room. Then came the knock. Slow, measured, the kind of knock that carries intention. I remember freezing mid-motion, a towel still in my hands. For some reason, my heart sank before I even reached the door. When I opened it, the years collapsed. There she was, Lauren, my daughter. Older, yes, but unmistakably her. Her hair was shorter, her posture more tired, but that same familiar detachment lingered in her eyes. She smiled, too quickly, too perfectly, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. It had been more than 10 years since she walked away, leaving her sick child behind. I had imagined this moment countless times, what I'd say, how I'd feel, but in reality, all I felt was hollow disbelief. She spoke softly at first, her voice honeyed with practiced remorse. She said she wanted to reconnect, that life had been hard, that she'd changed. I stood there listening, my mind flipping through old memories like torn photographs. Lauren's laughter as a child, her anger as an adult, and the note she left the day she abandoned Ethan. Something inside me knew this sudden visit wasn't born of love. It was convenience dressed up as guilt. I invited her in, out of politeness more than forgiveness. She sat at the table where Tom used to read the paper, and for a while, I let her talk. She spoke of finding herself, of regret, of wanting to rebuild bridges. But every word felt rehearsed. Her eyes darted too much toward the framed photos on the wall. The ones of Ethan's graduation, his awards, his smiling face beside mine. I saw it then. She wasn't here for family. She was here for what she thought she'd lost control over. Ethan came home halfway through the conversation. The moment he saw her, the air shifted. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, taller than her now, calm but distant. The last time she saw him, he was a boy. Now, he was a man, and she no longer had power over him. He greeted her politely, but with the kind of firmness that only years of healing can give. His restraint spoke louder than any anger could. As we sat together, the truth began to slip through her words. She mentioned debts, hinted at needing help, then veered toward the subject of inheritance. Tom's name, the house, even the small savings account we'd built for Ethan's education. That was the moment I knew for sure. Her remorse had a price tag. I remember feeling something unexpected then. Not fury, not heartbreak, just clarity. I told her, in my own quiet way, that the past couldn't be rewritten, and that forgiveness doesn't mean reopening old wounds. She smiled faintly, realizing she'd gotten nothing from us. Not money, not sympathy, not control. When she finally left, the door closed with a dull, final thud. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty porch, feeling the old ache return, but without the weight it once had. Ethan came up beside me, his presence grounding, his calm radiating reassurance. That night, as I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker, I realized closure doesn't always come through peace. It often arrives disguised as confrontation. But deep down, I also sensed it wasn't over. There was something unfinished in the way she looked back before leaving, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. It happened on a gray Sunday morning, the kind where the clouds hang low, heavy with something unsaid. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, when I heard the front gate creak open. My heart sank before I even turned around. Some instincts never fade. When I looked through the window, there she was again. Lauren, walking up the path like she'd never truly left. I didn't open the door right away. For a moment, I stood frozen, gripping the edge of the counter, my pulse steady but heavy. When I finally did, her expression was different from before, less composed, more desperate. The kind of desperation that comes when charm no longer works. She said she needed to talk, that she'd made mistakes, that she just wanted to set things right. I let her inside, though every part of me warned against it. Some lessons come wrapped in politeness. Her words came fast, too fast, dripping with apology, but hollow in weight. She spoke of loneliness, of regret, of wanting her son back in her life. But beneath the surface, I heard a tremor of entitlement, the faint tone of someone still rehearsing their performance. She looked around the house as she spoke, her eyes darting to the photographs again, to the subtle signs of a life that had flourished without her. I could see the envy creeping in, the disbelief that we'd done so well without her shadow looming over us. When she mentioned money again, just a hint, a passing comment about what she deserved after everything, I felt something in me go still. I didn't react. Not yet. I simply folded my hands in my lap and listened. Years of raising Ethan had taught me that silence can be its own strength. That's when Ethan appeared from the hallway. He'd been upstairs, but I think he'd heard enough. He didn't rush in. He simply walked over, calm, steady, composed. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, but understanding. The kind that comes from finally seeing a person clearly, without the haze of longing or pain. He spoke softly, but every word carried weight. Through my eyes, I can still see it, the way he stood, unflinching, as she tried to twist her words into guilt. He told her, in that steady voice, that forgiveness didn't mean return. That family wasn't just about blood, it was about choice, about who shows up when it matters. He said he wished her peace, but that peace would have to find her somewhere else. Lauren's face faltered then. The facade cracked. She tried to play the mother's card, the wounded victim, but the performance no longer held power. Ethan's calm disarmed her in a way anger never could. For the first time, I saw her realize that she had truly lost control, not because we pushed her away, but because we no longer needed her permission to heal. I didn't speak much during it all. I just watched my grandson, the boy I once held through fevers and nightmares, stand in the place his grandfather once did, protecting, grounded, compassionate, yet unyielding. And in that moment, I felt the weight of years lift from my chest. When Lauren finally left, she didn't slam the door this time. She walked away quietly, head lowered, carrying the hollow silence of her own making. The house felt lighter, not triumphant, just free. Ethan turned to me then, his expression calm but solemn. I could see Tom in him again, in the steady way he breathed, in the quiet courage that filled the room. That night, I sat by the window, the same one where I'd once watched my daughter drive away for the first time. I thought about the strange symmetry of life, how sometimes the ones who were broken find the strength to become whole again, and the ones who cause the break never do. Peace, I realized, doesn't come from winning a fight. It comes from knowing you no longer have to. The mornings are quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Most days, I wake before sunrise, pour a cup of coffee, and sit by the window overlooking the garden Tom planted decades ago. The air smells like dew and lilac. The birds start their chatter just as the first light touches the trees, and for a moment, everything feels whole. It's in these still hours that I think about how far we've come. There was a time when silence in this house meant grief, when every empty chair carried a memory of loss. Now, the quiet feels like peace. I used to wonder if forgiveness meant weakness, if letting go meant forgetting the harm someone caused. But over the years, I've learned it's neither. Forgiveness isn't pretending the pain never existed. It's choosing not to live inside it anymore. Ethan taught me that without ever meaning to. Watching him grow, I realized love isn't about perfection or blood. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's hard. He became the kind of man who listens more than he speaks, who helps without being asked, who carries both kindness and courage in equal measure. He's built a life of his own now, a good life, a wife who's gentle and sharp, a job where he fights for those without a voice. I see so much of Tom in him, and maybe a little of myself too. Sometimes I look at the old photos, the ones I once couldn't bear to touch. I keep a few of Lauren tucked away in a drawer, not out of bitterness, but out of acceptance. Her story took a different road, one I can't follow. I don't hate her anymore. I don't wait for her calls. I simply wish her peace from afar. That's all that's left to give, and it's enough. When I think back on it all, the betrayals, the tears, the nights I thought I'd lost everything, I see now that love never really left. It just changed shape. It became quieter, steadier, like the roots of those lilac bushes outside. Stronger for having weathered every storm. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been broken by someone you love, I hope you know this truth. Peace doesn't come from fixing what's shattered. It comes from learning to live beautifully beside the cracks. You can still build something whole from what remains. These days, I don't chase closure. I live it. Every sunrise, every shared meal with Ethan, every soft laugh. It's proof that love, when given freely, can outlast anything. Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved just to find peace? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.